Good evening. Welcome to the Board of Adjustment meeting for Thursday, February 9th. Let us begin the meeting with the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, now going through our roll call of members. Jill.
Yes.
Rob.
Yes.
George.
Here.
Bonnie.
Yes.
Amy.
Yes.
And Mike is absent, and then I am here. Before we begin our business this evening, I have an overview of what to expect tonight at the Board of Adjustment meeting. I have a couple of announcements. If you're in possession of a cell phone or some other type of electronic or paging device, I ask that you put it on silent mode at this time. Also, please note that all testimony is being tape recorded for the record. If you're going to speak, you'll be asked to state your name and address for the record first, and then go ahead with your input after you've been recognized by the chair. Members of the Board of Adjustment are appointed by the County Board of Commissioners with one member from each of the 5 commissioner districts, one member at large, and one member appointed from the Planning Commission. So the brief overview that we have of our proceedings this evening, I'll read out the variance request and open the public hearing. While I'm reading your request, I'll ask that the applicant or their representative come forward and have a seat in front of the board by the microphone. The applicant or their representative will be asked to state their name and address for the public record. Environmental Services staff will provide a brief overview of the requested variance, the staff report, and if any correspondence has been received regarding the variance. The applicant or their representatives will then provide any input, corrections, concerns, or comments. Once the applicant or their representatives have provided their testimony, the board will discuss the request and ask questions of staff or the applicant or their representative. Upon completion of board questions, I'll ask if there's anyone in the audience wishing to speak to this request. If there is, I would ask that the person come up to the podium, state their name and address for the record, and give their testimony. When all testimony is complete, I'll ask the board members for a motion to close the public hearing. Once the motion is passed to close the public hearing, there will be no further input from the audience, from the applicant or Environmental Services staff, unless recognized by the chair or if one of the board members wants some type of clarification. The board will then review and discuss the findings of fact. The findings are a series of questions that the board is required to answer based on state statutes and requirements of the ordinance. Based upon the answers of those questions, the board will either grant or deny the variance request. All questions must be answered in the affirmative by the board, and once the findings are complete, there will be a motion to approve or deny the request based upon those findings. And I think we have election of officers, right, to do next? Okay. All right, nominations for chair.
I'll make a motion to elect this guy right here.
All right. Motion from George. Second.
I'll second it.
Second from Rob. Any others? Should go forward. All those in favor of myself as chair, say aye.
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 Same sign. Now, election for a vice chair. Any nominations?
Mr. Chairman, I'll nominate Jill DeLong.
Okay. Jill. Motion from Rob. Second.
I'll second that.
Second from Bonnie. All those in favor of Jill serving as vice chair, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. And our secretary, which is the greatest job in the world because somebody does your work for you. So anybody willing to take that heavy burden?
Mr. Chairman, I'll take the job again.
Okay. All right. Rob has nominated himself to take care of that important position. Can I get a second?
I will second that.
All right. A second from George. All those in favor of Rob continuing on as our secretary, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. All right. So
Mr. Chair, I don't know if you did oaths of office while I stepped out.
No, not yet.
Okay.
No. Okay. All right. I don't have the material for the oath of office, but.
Right. So just a heads up on that. You'll be getting an email from Deb, and there's an e-signature for the oath of office and the ethics form. So just stay tuned for that. And I just talked to Member Prell, and he is going to be absent tonight.
Okay. Very good. So then moving on to our business at hand this evening, agenda item number 1. A request from James and Jennifer Affinson of Painesville, Minnesota, from sections 10.211A, 1A, and 10.214K of Stearns County Land Use and Zoning Ordinance number 439 to construct a principal structure home less than 75 feet landward of the ordinary high water level of Lake Coronis, classified as general development and in excess of a maximum allowed square footage of impervious surface in the shore impact zone. Said ordinance requires the principal structures be set back a minimum of 75 feet from the lake's classified general development and allows for a maximum impervious surface square footage of 250 square feet in the shore impact zone. The affected property is Lot 4, Block 2 of the Huntington Estates, Section 28, Painesville Township, and the address of the property is 28905 Lake Avenue, Painesville, Minnesota. And so the applicants, can I get both your names and addresses for the public record, please?
I'm Jennifer Anfinson, and 29497 Crest Ridge Road in Painesville.
James Amfinson, 29497 Crest Ridge Road, Painesville.
Thank you very much. And then we'll come back to you, and now we'll take the staff report. But before we do that, can I get a roll call of who was able to make it out to the site? Jill?
No.
Rob?
Yes.
George?
No.
I was. Bonnie?
Yes.
And
Yes.
okay, very good. And then staff to report.
Good evening, Mr. Chair, members of the board. The applicants own Lot 4, Block 2 of Huntington Estates. It's in an R1 zoning district. Huntington Estates was platted in June of 2020, and such a recent plat would infer that each lot would entitle owners reasonable space to accommodate a residential dwelling unit and a standard sewage treatment system, which would meet all the setback requirements. The applicants acquired the property in November of 2022. So currently, the existing conditions, there's a 30 by 38, 1,140 square foot, 2-bedroom cabin. Per our county assessor's records, that was constructed in 1917, and they submitted a certificate of survey, and that indicates that the structure is 28.3 feet landward of the ordinary high water level of Lake Coronis. It is partially within the 100-year flood hazard area, and also partially within the shore impact zone, which is 50 feet. Currently, the sewage treatment system is a sealed holding tank, and just to make note that any alteration to this structure being in the impact zone would require a request for variance, as the ordinance doesn't allow for alterations or additions to a structure that's partially or wholly within the shore impact zone. The applicants are proposing a completely new structure. It would basically be double in size, 2,280 square feet. It's in the exact same location, 28.3 feet. It's going to just be a brand new structure with an additional story on top. They are not afforded an established building line to possibly lessen the setback from 75 feet because there is no principal structure on the lot to the east. The shore impact zone nearly cuts the proposed dwelling in two, which results in a 640 square foot impervious surface calculation. We had a recent ordinance revision that now only allows a maximum impervious threshold of 250 square feet within the shore impact zone. The applicants do plan to install a new sewage treatment system to replace the existing holding tank. In addition, they are proposing to construct a 26 by 32 detached garage, which would meet all the setback requirements. And there's an existing shed that's 8 by 16 there that they're planning on removing. The proposed house location is in an R1 zoning district. It's, of course, in shoreland. Coronis is classified general development. As I said earlier, it's partially in the 100-year flood hazard area and the shore impact zone, and Coronis is on the impaired waters list for mercury and fish. A preliminary design for the new septic system has been submitted by a licensed designer. The existing impervious lot coverage is 9.9%, and proposed would equate to approximately 16.1% per their certificate of survey. One alternative to the request would be to move the proposed structure to a location meeting the minimum setback requirements out of the shore impact zone and the 100-year flood hazard area. Another option would be to replace the structure as is where it is. State statute would allow for replacement, exact same dimensions, and height. So Paynesville Township, the North Fork of the Crow River Watershed, Coronis Lake Association, City of Paynesville, DNR, and property owners within 500 feet have been notified of the request. Enclosed in your packets is the proposed mitigation options from Stearns County Soil and Water. And just wanted to make note that if the variances would be granted, the property owner should be aware that any additions or alterations to the structure in the future would be subject to a variance request. And I do have 2 items of correspondence to read into the record. One is one I received early this afternoon from Nikki Blake Bradley, the DNR area hydrologist. Hello, David. I had thought I might be able to attend this evening's meeting to present my comments in person, but will not be able to do so. Hence, I am sending a comment. Please receive my comments to be read into the record at the Board of Adjustment meeting. The DNR recommends denial of the application from Mr. and Mrs. Amundson to build a more non-conforming structure in the shore impact zone of Lake Coronis at 28905 Lake Avenue, Paynesville, Minnesota. I noted that Huntington Estates was platted in June 2020. This lot has plenty of space for a new structure to be constructed that meets Stearns County ordinance requirements as well as DNR shoreline rules. It appears that a portion of the existing structure is within the 1% chance floodplain or 100-year floodplain. No structures other than a water-oriented accessory structure are to be built within the shore impact zone. A house is a principal structure, not an accessory structure. Nonconformities may be reconstructed as long as they are not making the lot any more nonconforming. Adding a second story onto a nonconforming structure increases the nonconformity, potentially impacts the neighboring property's view, and increases the visual impact from the water. If the Amfundsons desire a second story, the house can be moved back to meet the structural setback. Practical difficulties cannot be met in this situation. Thank you for the opportunity to comment on the proposal. Kind regards, Nikki. And then I do have one other item of correspondence. It's from Gregory Fredericks. It's addressed to the Stearns County Board of Adjustment members. My name is Greg Fredericks, and my wife Ann and I live on parcel 26.16237.0026. This property is adjacent to the east of the Amundson property. We go on record as objecting to the request for the variance. It is our understanding that Amundsen's proposal is to build within the 75-foot zone of the ordinary high water level of Lake Coronis. We think building a 2-story structure at the requested building site will have a negative impact on our quality of enjoying the lake and a negative impact on our property value. It would appear they have a lot which would allow them to build up to the 75-foot boundary without any difficulty. My reading of the zoning ordinance shows it to have been amended 9/27/22, which would indicate it is the current view of the county and public at large the 75-foot setback be upheld. It is my intention to attend the meeting on February 9th. If any board members have questions, thank you for your time and consideration in this matter. Gregory Fredericks. And that is all I have, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. And Amfundsons, to your request.
Well, hi. Well, we are excited about our property, and to build a home there for our family, James, I, and our daughter, Finley. We have loved the property for many years and are excited about it. We feel like, for many reasons, rebuilding in the current footprint of the property has the least impact on the land and the lake, and that's what we're proposing to do.
Just to add to that, first of all, thank you for taking the time to meet with us out of your busy evenings. I appreciate it. I would just like to add that we've done a lot of homework, considered many different options and things, reduced our request to the minimum of what we could based on what's there and what would allow our family a comfortable lifestyle there. Building where the current structure is would minimize the impact to the lot, minimize erosion, and allow us to essentially just maintain the same type of or similar look to what's there. Moving it back to the 75 feet would, because of the grade and the slope, would be quite a bit more difficult build and more expensive, of course. And then accessibility during both building as well as in the future for maintenance would be hindered by the slope itself. Also, the part of the erosion consideration. I think that covers it. Hopefully you have some questions.
Sure, yeah. Board members, questions for staff or the applicants?
Mr. Chair. Oh,
Sorry.
go ahead. No, go ahead, Amy.
You got it.
Question for staff. So if, would there be a variance required if they built on the same location, the single story? I just want to get that clear.
Mr. Chair, Member Fiedler, a variance would not be required if it was replaced exactly as it is. So if you go a foot longer, a foot wider, a foot taller, it requires a variance.
Same footprint, one story. Okay, I just want to get that clear in my head. Thank you.
It was confusing, correct? The initial reading said there would be a variance to be required, period, to alter the structure at all. Is that what we're clarifying?
Yes.
Okay.
Maybe we want to show this too. I don't know.
I have a question for staff. When I looked on the,
Amy, can you talk into the mic, please? Thank you.
I just want to know, is this zoning district also R5 as well as R1?
Mr. Chair, Member Sherping, this lot in particular is zoned R1.
Because when I pull the property information, it tells me it's zoned R5 too. I just want to clarify.
Not this lot. It's R1.
Can I show you what I have here?
Sure.
I think she turned it off. So when I ran it, these are all R1, these are all R1, R5. Can't be zoned more than one thing. So this map is up to date as it can be zoned more than one.
This is not the right zoning district right there. It's R1.
But when I pulled it up on my phone, it tells me it's closed.
Well, the Stern site's incorrect.
Mr. Chair, just for the benefit of the public, since when we're away from our mics, nothing can be heard. So again, pulling up the zoning map, here's the property. I can certainly review with Member Sherping after the meeting how she got the information she had, but zoning districts right here.
So if you click on that, it'll bring up all the property information.
Yep, and Amy, why don't you and I do that afterwards? And the reason I'm not concerned is because the primary zoning district R5 or R1 in this case doesn't have anything to do with the shoreline request. So I appreciate your asking the question, and why don't we just stay afterwards and we'll go through that together.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, question for the applicant. When you were saying why you did not want to place the structure in a different location on the lot, you mentioned the difficulty in building, the difficulty in access, the erosion, but you are building a detached garage. Why not build your primary home where that garage is?
So the access to the garage would be from the lower level, and that would minimize the actual cutback into the hill would be minimal, and it would be built into the hill and not be necessarily rising above or creating a large slope or, I don't know, too much grade to around the structure and down to the waterway. And then also if you come back between the east side property line and then the grade that comes up, it's quite steep, and that also would then minimize what could be built even further unless we're able to somehow rebuild the grade around that side. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay.
I have an additional question. They did mention that it is within the 1% risk of a 100-year flood. How are you going to get home insurance?
So the grade or the floor level of the new home would be at the required height, and then around that, the RFP, according to Dave, is a certain level that for 20 feet, or is it 15 or 20 feet around the structure, you have to increase the grade. So it would then essentially be out of the 100-year flood zone.
So wouldn't that also disturb the land? That was one of your arguments for putting it there.
We wouldn't be digging into the ground. We would actually be adding soil. And you can do that, I feel like, particularly during building, if you were to get it seems like every time you build, you get the once in a 100-year rain, or it seems like it. And at least you would have that to be able to minimize the runoff. And if you can place the grade, rather than try to dig into it and hold it back, if we can place it, we can reach compaction through mechanical means or whatever it would take in order for it to be stable.
Thank you.
Yep.
I have a question. Is this a design that you came up with yourself, or is it a design that you came up with from a contractor? Or
no, we came up with it ourselves.
Okay.
Through lots of consultations with different people.
Okay. Did you consider at all, a different house design? There's the tuck under garages and variety of different styles of homes that would allow you to move it back to where the garage area is?
We did consider different styles of homes. We also considered the home that we did finally design. We put a low roof slope, minimize framing members to try to keep the height low. That gives us an overall increase of only 7 feet of the structure.
Yep, so the total, James drew a picture here, the total height increase with the second story in the footprint that the cabin has now is 7 feet higher than what it is now.
Thank you.
So we wanted to make it as small as possible. And the only reason that we want to put a second story on is just because of our family size. So the cabin is really small, and we would be happy just replacing it, but it's not big enough for our family. So that's why we want the second story.
So to try to answer your question a little more completely, we did consider lots of different styles. I don't think a tuck under garage gets us anywhere. If anything, we'd have like a second story garage and then maybe like a walkout basement, with considerable grade around what would be the west side.
Mhm.
I have a question for the applicants. You've mentioned your family now twice. Is your family growing or downside, getting smaller, or?
Our daughter's a sophomore, and we aren't growing, but she, of course, over time, hopefully will increase our family.
The reason I ask it that way is because you live on the lake now. And this house is smaller, your proposal is smaller than what you live in now.
No, our home now our proposal is more square footage than the home we live in now. We have lived in a home that was much larger, and then we moved into a smaller lake cabin for the interim.
Isn't your current house a 2-story?
It has a walkout basement.
Right.
Okay.
So it's 2 levels like you're proposing.
Yeah, 12 feet of it has a basement, 12 feet by 24 feet.
I think our current home is 1,200 square feet.
I think so.
Your current home is 2,324 square feet. If you're up and down.
At 29497 Crest Ridge Road at that location.
Yeah.
It's the
According
home
to
is,
the county, anyway.
Oh, that's weird. It doesn't have a full basement.
Okay.
It's only got a very partial. I think it's, like I said, it's like maybe 12, 11 feet wide by the depth of the cabin right there is maybe 24 feet.
Okay.
So,
Thank you.
yeah. So we would like a little more square footage than what we have now. It's quite tight.
Very much so.
Right.
Question for staff. Can you put up that one drawing that has kind of a maroon line that goes all through the lot? I don't know what that is. I'm trying to figure that out.
Not that one.
Oh, yeah. I know.
Not the one that's on the other one. Not that one. There's another aerial view
Yeah.
with that line running
An
through
aerial,
it.
like drawing, not a.
Nope, it's an aerial.
Is it the
aerial
site
photo,
survey?
right?
We're talking about
Yeah,
this-
right there.
Yeah, that one. It's
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. You're
Yeah. What is my question is what is that kind of maroon line going through there? What does that signify?
that the easement for the drainage.
I'm sorry, I was speaking with the applicants. What's the question
That
again?
maroon line that goes the whole length of the lot and then crosses over to the structure and into the next lot. What is that?
Okay, Mr. Chair, Member Fiedler, that's the floodplain boundary right there.
Okay.
And the blue line is the 75-foot required setback. And then there's a dotted line that nearly bisects the structure, and that is the shore impact zone.
That one right there.
And I have a question for staff. In the paperwork, it talked about a drainage easement. Can you address that, where that is? And
Well, it just runs along the creek.
oh, okay. So it'd be just on the edge of the creek, not
Yeah,
anywhere else on the property
I think
right.
it's 10 feet from the
creek.
wall, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Just wondering if I could mention something with this being up there. When it was a little bit smaller, you could see next to us is a boathouse. That was just one problem we thought when moving it back to the 75 feet. That would be our view. That's literally right on the water. So that's something that we wanted to mention.
Just a question. By moving it back, I noticed there's a lot of trees on the property. I mean, what
Yeah.
are we talking about for removal of trees? And are you going to have to move the drainage system then?
The drainage system as in the septics. So there isn't one currently. There is 2 sites on one of the forms that show where they would go in future site. I feel like it would be hard to get it in there. I guess you could build any size home, then we wouldn't be restricted to 2,200 or whatever square feet we're looking at. And it could be up to 30 feet high at the 75-foot mark. So if you did that, I'm not exactly sure what the drain field requirements would be. We had the design made based on our 3-bedroom home plan. So I feel like I'm sure that we could figure something out, but I'm not exactly sure how feasible. There are a ton of trees that would have to come down if we move back too, and that would be
There would be a
impactful
lot.
for sure.
Just out of curiosity, what are we talking? 5, 10?
Numbers of trees?
Just ballpark.
If
Maybe
we moved it back set to the 75 feet.
in order to alter the grade so that the house would be accessible, probably 50 mature trees. If that, I would just be guessing because we actually hadn't spent a lot of time looking at that, but the grade on the west side is pretty substantial and that would have to be altered. And as you see that grade coming up from the creek, if you move back to 75 feet and start there, it narrows up real quick as far as like the flat area or the building space.
A spot that, because of that creek that runs along the one side, it's a really nice feature, but it's also hard to get every, yeah.
Especially when you consider
House.
when you consider the 10-foot setback easement with it, it becomes, pretty wide and it takes up a chunk of the lot.
And I have a question for staff. I was out there to see it, but in the winter, it's really hard to, identify things. If staff would comment on this, if the house replaced where the garage is, would there be enough space further back toward the road for a garage?
Mr. Chair, Member Mossman, I think it could become an attached garage. I guess your question specifically is, could they do a detached?
Could they just move everything that they've got there? If they moved everything back further, would there be room for it between that and where the septics are and the grade and?
Well, I think they could, my opinion would be that they could accomplish that same footprint right behind or in front of the detached.
Okay.
And meet the setbacks. They probably would want to flip the garage to the west.
Different direction.
Yeah. It would have to orient a little bit differently on the lot, but I think it would be
possible.
feasible.
Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, Bonnie, just to comment on that too, if you look at the plat, it's 40,000 square feet, so it's just under an acre. Granted, you have the creek running alongside of it, but just to give you perspective on lot size, it's about 40,000 square feet.
Mr. Chair, question for staff or the applicant. Can you indicate on this map where the septic tank is, please?
I think if you flip to the next screen, it shows that. There, yeah.
Well, no,
Proposed.
that would be the proposed.
I can point to it up there if you'd like, where it is right now.
One? Oh, okay.
It's like right in here, right?
Yeah.
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 It's pretty much in between the existing and the proposed detached garage.
So just to add to when you were talking about building a garage further back, moving the house back, and then if we look at all the grade lines, do you see on there where they're so tight, like the gradient is there's a lot of places that map really doesn't show what the accessibility because I don't know if it's over the several thousands of years has eroded that way, but there's like gullies and things that when you're walking in on what is the driveway now and it shows it up there, you're essentially walking alongside the slope almost the whole way until you get to, all the way to where the proposed garage would be. There's quite a bit of slope. So to get to more than a door, one garage door would be tricky, I think, from the upper part.
Also, if we were to build at 75 feet, we couldn't build the footprint, the house that we have, because we wanted to just simply build in the footprint of the cabin, but we wouldn't build that at 75 feet back because of the grade and everything. It would have to be a totally different house. So just thinking about that, how much more square footage that would take up, and then the garage in back of that, and then the septic in back of that.
And then potentially you can also put then also a detached garage, correct? If you have an attached garage, you can do another structure. Yep. So we could actually change it substantially.
Yep.
Anybody else on the board wishing to speak to this matter? With that, hearing no questions from the board members, opening the public hearing up to anyone who wishes to speak to this. And a reminder, when you come to the podium, please state your name and address for the public record, please.
Good evening. My name is Greg Fredericks. I own the land adjacent to the Anfinsons. My wife and I have been there for 30 years. Over the course of those 30 years, we've done 2 different construction projects. One of them was the east side of the house, and we took off a deck that wasn't functioning and put an existing one on. We were told very concretely that we couldn't get any deviation from where we're at relative to the shoreline. In 2010, we remodeled our house. Again, we ran into the same type of issues. We actually enlarged the footprint of the house, and we owned the second lot. We had to join the second lot and the existing lot that our house is on in order to meet the permeability requirements. Having lived there for 30 years and being friends with the previous residents of the cabin, I know for a fact that the comment about an obstruction of view by going back 75 feet isn't true. The reason for that is I've sat in that cabin and looked at the retaining wall on the side of the hill or the west side of my boathouse rather than seeing a hill. So if you're on top of the hill, in line with where our house would be, just like our house, you'd look over the boathouse. It wouldn't obstruct it at all. So with almost an acre in area, and identifying, and some of the board members have been out to the property, I'm very well aware of what's buildable and what's not. It's a choice they made. I don't really think that we should have our sight lines affected by a variance that's obviously been up to date, September of 22, because they want to have a second story. If we had that picture that they had pulled up about a 7-foot difference, in reality, if you look at the south corner of that house, it isn't a 7-foot difference. The existing structure has got a southward sloping roof. If they build a second story, it'll be more than 7 feet. I don't know if that's available to get that. This is from the west. So to the right is the sloping roof line. So you would go from the front part here up an entire story, and then you'd have the actual roof. So that's not going to be 7 feet. If you look at the center point and go up, then it's probably going to be 7 foot. So I looked out before I came here today, out my window. If I look to the southwest or the west, as it stands now, we have a view. If that becomes a 2-story house in that same footprint, we won't. And I don't think as a landowner of 30 years in the county that's something that would be appropriate. So that's my response to it. And my neighbors, and we all have houses of varying ages. Our house originally was built, and it's 78 feet away from the high water mark. Our other neighbor, the house was built in the mid to early 70s. That's like 69 feet away. 2 more houses down to the east are even further away. So I think it's in the best interest of the lake, and I happen to be on the Lake Association on the Water Quality Committee. If we can get more structures away, I'm pretty confident that if we had an issue with our boathouse and I came to get it rebuilt, that I probably wouldn't get that request fulfilled. And I would understand that. Fortunately, that boathouse was built 12 years before we even moved to the property, so it was out of our control. So I think in the interest of water quality, and right now we're having issues with Lake Coronis. We've got 2 different aquatic invasive species, anything we can do to try to preserve the water quality is going to be something that everybody can enjoy. So I can answer any questions if anybody has any.
What's your view on the other side?
The other side, it's totally unrestricted. You know, my neighbor to the east, our houses are almost in alignment. I look out to the lake. I mean, I have to get out of my house to look and see their house. If the current structure is built the way it is, they could be in their second floor and look right into my living room. I'm not really excited about that. So, and I empathize with their family size and all that kind of stuff. I would actually, my wife would be also, if they built the exact same structure in the exact same place and it was single story, I wouldn't be here. I'd be all for it. But going to a second story that's pushing the boundaries a little too much for us. Any other questions?
Thank you.
Thanks.
Anybody else from the audience wishing to speak to this? Anyone else from the audience wishing to speak to this? Hearing no one else wishing to speak to this item, can I get a motion and a second to close the public hearing, please?
I'll move to close the public hearing.
All right, I have a motion. Can I get a second?
I'll second.
I have a second. All those in favor of closing the public hearing say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. And now moving to our finding of facts. The proposed use is allowed in the zoning districts in which the subject property is located, yes or no?
Residences are allowed in A1s,
Okay.
or R1s, excuse me.
All right, it's a yes from Bonnie. Jill?
Yes.
George?
No.
Okay. Amy?
Yes.
Rob?
Yes.
And I'm a yes, so it's a yes for number one. Number two, the variance will be in harmony with the general purposes and intent of the official controls. Yes or no?
Jill DeLong, I'd like to say no to this one. The county allows an in-kind replacement, but it's not an in-kind. It's not just the size of the building. They're also replacing the seasonal use of the cabin with a full-time residence. And with that being so close to the lake, I think that really is changing things. So I'm going to say no, it's not in harmony.
All right, no from Jill. George?
No.
Amy?
No.
Bonnie?
No.
Rob?
I'm going to say no, but I want to come at a different angle than Jill. I just quote the ordinance that involved. It says, in no case shall a principal structure be permitted closer than 75 feet on a general development lake.
Okay, thank you. And I'm a no, so that's a no for number two. Number three, the variance will be consistent with the comprehensive plan, yes or no?
I'm going to say, Bonnie Mossman, I'm going to say no for that one. Under Lakeshore Living Policies, number 2, to encourage shoreline protection, and whenever you're increasing something, there's often a effect on the shoreline. And 8, Part 1, the project preserves sightlines, and I do think it will affect sightlines of neighboring properties.
Okay, so no for Bonnie. Jill?
No.
George?
No, but I would like to cite comprehensive plan nature, underwater resources policies number 2, recognize the relationship between land use and water quality and continue to support water quality improvements through land use plans and regulations.
All right, Rob?
I'm going to say no, but I'm going to go to Lakeshore Living Policies number 3, discourage the alteration of natural shorelands and the creation of impervious surface in the shore areas.
And then Amy?
No.
Okay. No for number 3. Number 4, the property owner proposes to use the property in a reasonable manner, yes or no?
Jill DeLong, I'm going to say yes, it is reasonable to want to live on your R1 property on the lake. So I believe that is a reasonable manner.
All right, a yes from Jill. George?
Yes.
Amy?
Yes.
Bonnie?
Yes.
Rob?
No, I'm going to say no because it's 63% over the allowable setback and 256% over the shore impact zone for impervious cover.
Okay. No from Rob. But yes for number 4. The plight of the landowner is due to circumstances unique to the property, not created by the landowner. Yes or no?
I'm going to say no, because I think it's their choice of where they're placing the house, and the style of house. They possibly could find a style of house that would work well further back.
Okay, no for Bonnie. Jill?
No.
George?
No.
Amy?
No.
Rob?
No.
And I'm a no, so it's a yes, or excuse me, no for number 5. Number 6, the variance, if granted, maintains the essential character of the locality. Yes or no?
Jill DeLong, I would like to say that no, it does not maintain the essential character. They're replacing a 1-story seasonal cabin with a 2-story full-time residential home, so that does change the character of the locality.
Okay, no for Jill. George?
No.
Amy?
Come back to me.
Okay, Bonnie?
No, and I'm going to say because of the reasons, if you look at the setback, as was stated, theirs would be a 63% deviation. If you look at the, further down the lake, there's the 69.3, that's only an 8% deviation, and the other house that's 73.5, that's only a 2% deviation. And so I think it's a significant difference from what the rest of the houses in the area would be.
Okay, no for Bonnie. Rob?
No.
I'm a no. Amy?
No.
No. No for number 6. Number 7, the need for the variance involves more than economic considerations. Yes or no?
Well, I do believe that I would say yes, that it does involve something other than economics. It was their choice, their desire for a certain style house and the location of the house and the garage.
Yes from Bonnie. Jill?
Yes.
George?
Yes.
Amy?
Yes.
Rob?
Yes.
And I'm a yes for number 7. So there being multiple no's for the finding of facts, we need to look for a motion to deny the variance request.
Mr. Chair, I'll move to deny the request.
Motion from George,
Jill DeLong, I'll second.
second from Jill. Okay. The remaining votes, Amy? And this is to deny, so it'd be a yes to deny.
Yes to deny.
Okay. Bonnie?
Yes.
Rob?
Yeah.
And I am a yes. So the motion is therefore denied, but do please come back to staff and we'll see what we can do for you during regular business hours. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
You got any questions?
Yep, go ahead. Safe travels. Mm-hmm. All right, so Greg, you're on.
I'm just looking for the presentation here, so bear with me.
What is this on?
I assume this. Maybe? No, maybe not. Some sort of presentation.
Well, good evening, Mr. Chair and members of the board. I'm Greg Berg. I work at the Stern Soil and Water. I think I've met some of you. I'm the man behind the comments that you get almost every month. And so I thought I'd go through a little bit. I was here last week when you had the DNR here talking about some of the issues with variances and things like that and water quality. So I thought I would go through a couple of things just as a prevail and then go through a few examples of ones that I've commented on in the past, and maybe we can just have a little discussion about frankly how much good they may do or may not do if they are granted with mitigation standards. Let's see here.
It's not advancing?
No. There we go. Okay. So you saw this slide if you were here last week, and you can see from left to right how much of an impact having just the amount of impervious coverage and the amount of vegetation change and things like that on lots create. So I won't go into it in too much detail, but I just wanted to give you a little background on that. This does matter, and it does make a difference on especially the water quality, which is one of the main things that I'm looking at when I review these applications. I think you're going to have to advance them.
Okay.
For some reason, it doesn't look like we're in a PowerPoint, but maybe that's just how it gets projected. So one of the limiting factors in a lot of the lakes is phosphorus. And so you might say, well, a lot of times with these, is there a way to go to the full screen or the PowerPoint or not? Because it's cutting it off even.
Why don't you help me out? I thought that's what we had. Mm-hmm.
So anyway, while she's fixing it, I can just talk about this. So, you know, one lot probably doesn't make a lot of difference, right? I mean, this is a depiction that I was given from DNR where it talks about having 0.2 pounds of phosphorus delivery from that lot. But when you collectively look at if you have 100 lots around the lake and you add up what those phosphorus inputs are, and a lot of times a limiting factor of that phosphorus delivery is 500 pounds of algae is created by 1 pound of phosphorus, it starts to add up and make a bigger difference. I'm in control now. I'm going wrong. Okay. I'll figure this out yet. So this is what you end up with a lot of times when we're worried about what we have for phosphorus input, the algae that you end up with. So we can relate that even to fishing. You want better fishing, reduce water runoff, because that can get impacted as well. And so I have some things that can relate. And if you're interested in looking at maybe some of these lakes as they come in as far as how they might be impacted, the DNR has a new watershed health assessment framework tool that you can go on their website and you can look at any lake in the state and get a score for where it's at. And that would help you for kind of what the teetering factor is on where these lakes are at. A lot of our lakes around here are impaired or close to being impaired. And so anything we can do to try to change that direction helps. This is Eden Lake in Stearns County. It does give a lake health score. It's kind of hard to see in the middle there above that kind of rainbow type thing. But anyway, you can go on their website and take a look at this. And then it gives a lot of background information on the lake too, as far as size and depth and different things like that. There's other water quality data that's related to this that you can even get into. So it's a neat tool that is brand new. They just released this within the last month. So yeah, go ahead anytime.
So how are they taking the water? I'm assuming they're taking water samples and having them tested?
Right.
When they do the water samples, are we taking it from one area or are they taking it from multiple areas?
It depends on the lake. So I'm not trying to be a politician and dodge the question, but it really depends on the lake if they have one main sampling point or if they have multiple points that they've established. But generally those are taken in one of the deepest parts of the lake, because that's where you get the full like mixing of the water and all that. I'm not a monitoring expert, but that is generally what's done. So on a smaller lake, you're probably going to only have 1 point. Like on Coronis that you were just dealing with, I think there's at least 3 places that are like depicted as kind of those main spots that you can go and take those samples from to compare them year after year. So you're comparing apples to apples.
So on the DNR website, when they do these water samples, are those for us to see?
Yeah.
Does that come up on there then?
It will. it'll be linked to the MPCA website, which is the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency. And then there's water quality data that ends up getting entered into there as it's done year by year. So last year's, if it was done, might not be public yet, but the years prior should be. And then you'd be able to see all of that data.
And then do you know exactly, like what are we testing for when they do these tests, when they're conducting them? What are things they're looking for?
Well, it depends on the lake, but there's a lot of different things that can be looked at, you know, as far as phosphorus is generally one, sometimes other nutrients. They can even do what's called like a Secchi disc reading, which is basically dropping a disc into the water to see what the clarity is, how far you can see that disc at different times of the year down in the water. So then that relates to, you know, like if we're relating it to fish, you know, you might see stunted fish or rough fish in the water that you see on the top, and you're going to see more of a normal array of fish like you would in the bottom with better water quality. So this is another one that was shared with me from John Hebert from the DNR. And overall, it just shows some of the reductions that we've had even in some of this older data in the amount of vegetation that's been cleared and that around our lakes statewide, either in the lake or on the shore itself. And then this kind of shows, you know, what our impacts are to like bass and crappie nesting as well, as far as where they do their spawning. And this is pretty easy to see that the undeveloped areas are in green, the low development is in yellow, and then the really heavily developed areas are in red around that lake. And you can see where a lot of that spawning activity is happening. So we're impacting what's happening as far as even repopulating our lakes by some of the development that happens. And that's not to say that people can't access the lake, but we maybe should try to minimize how much we're impacting the lake and the shoreline and not doing it from lot line to lot line. Another lake that they did the same thing, and you can see how it's fairly concentrated a lot in the undeveloped area. Again, where you have the development, you're going to have quite the diversity of fish, and a lot of times in the other areas where you have, you know, even concentrated area, maybe cleaner water, but it's all cleaned out and it's sand, you're going to have stunted fish. So when we talk about vegetation, a lot of times I'm recommending vegetation along the lake because a lot of these places that I'm going to, a majority of them, have mowed lawn to the lake. Some of the biggest enemy to our lakes is lawnmowers, chainsaws, that sort of thing. And this depiction just shows what native vegetation is or does. So on the far left, let's see if this pointer works. You can see right here, that's Kentucky bluegrass or lawn grass. And then this is in 1 foot increments. Try not to be so squirrely with my arm. This is 1 foot increments down into the soil. So you can see how a lot of these native grasses and wildflowers, they have a really deep root system. So that holds the soil, and it also allows for water to infiltrate following those root cavities down into the soil. So what is a shoreline restoration if you do recommend it? You know, it looks natural, it maintains natural or restores natural vegetation. Topography can be a big thing too. A lot of these places I'm looking at how steep the slope is or where that water can run. And it also helps with fish and wildlife, like I said before. So what are the benefits? Just some more benefits. You know, you have the deep-rooted plants, it filters runoff, you know, we can reduce flooding. And then, you know, there's other things as far as it's lower maintenance, it's not no maintenance, and even provides some privacy, which people like. So at the SWCD, we developed a policy quite a while ago, I don't know how many years ago, it was a long time ago now, where I've tried to kind of follow that with some of the recommendations I've made if it seems reasonable on the lot. And what it really is that if they have 100 feet or more, the access area is up to 25 feet.
That's a secret signal.
Trying to cut me off?
You're done.
Oh, you're still on back there.
I'll move to adjourn.
Greg, if you want to come sit here, you can speak to the slides.
I can still see it back here.
Oh,
You can
you
still,
guys just have to look
you
over
can look
here.
a little farther. So,
You really think that some of us can see that far?
But the presentation on, at least on this screen, is black.
Okay.
so anyway, 25 feet is normally what we recommend for the access area as far as the width of it at the widest point. There it comes back. So this picture gives you a little depiction of what it would look like on a lot, whether it was maintained or it was restored, as far as the access area and what would be native vegetation. There we go. Perfect timing. So what I did was I took a few examples of some that I reviewed in the last couple of years and kind of tried to point out a few things that you might want to think about. Like I mentioned to some of you when I was in the room last week, I have to make comments on these so that I don't lose my job and be, giving you the facts and giving you some realistic opportunities. And some of these, I'm basically trying to give you the lowest cost options that there are for them to do something, which aren't going to be full-blown engineering type things or moving a lot of soil or anything like that. So these are pretty standard things that I start the suggestions with. And you can see in what I underlined that these options should not be considered support of the application. You should, in my mind, look at the application for face value by itself. And then if you are thinking that you're going to approve it, if you feel like some of these mitigation options should go with it, then that should just be something that's added on. It shouldn't be something that supports your approval of the application in my mind. So with this one, I identified the no mold buffer on the slope, and there's an additional lot that they could route the water to. That additional lot has a natural depression area in it, which is kind of the perfect scenario, so to speak, because you can use that natural depressional area as a water quality benefit too, to send some of that stormwater there without it just routing right into the lake. So that can take the current impervious surface as well as the proposed impervious surface and try to get it there. In this case, it worked out pretty well, and I'll show on the map. That provides shoreline restoration benefits and some stormwater treatment. And that's what I try to point out in the comments. So this is a picture of the lot with kind of the area that they had left natural, and the area where these trees are, which it's hard to tell a little bit elevation, but the home is up here, and this area is somewhat a depression, and there's a little bit of a higher ridge along the lake. An excellent place to send some of that water. You can kind of see it from here a little bit better, how coming down the slope into this area, that water would have a chance to filter before it went into the lake. Just another view of it. And this is the actual survey drawing that I had mocked up and made some notes on. And so you can see how the elevations did work out good enough if they wanted to, that they could take and send this water this way, and then it could go towards the lake. And this is that depressional area and natural area that they could have either planted or that was existing. And then also to narrow down the area that they're using in the front or mowing. A lot of times these areas they're not even walking on a lot of times other than to push their mower. So another one on Cedar Island Lake. And this one was a really steep slope or bluff. And it required that when I looked at it, that to get to the top of the bluff, they would have a minimum of a 50-foot buffer landward to the ordinary high water level of the lake. And the proposed access to the area to the lake could be near the existing shed and patio that's already down there and has disturbance. The buffer in this case could provide some restoration benefits, but minimal stormwater treatment. And so what I want you to try to pick up on here, if I continue to do this, is that minimal is a key word in here. You've got to understand when I put something like that in there, it's trying to indicate to you that this may not do a lot of good, you know, as far as stormwater treatment. You're going to get some restoration benefits, but it's not going to do a lot on the stormwater treatment because it's such a steep slope that the water is going to run down it no matter what's there, so to speak. And there are some technical concerns, which I wrote into this one too, of routing that concentrated flow over steep slopes. A lot of times on bluffs, when you oversaturate them, you have a potential for slope failure because they're so steep. They'll just blow out, and a lot of times we've seen them end up in the lake, especially when you have directed impervious surface over them. So then I also put in here that there might be some consideration for technical options such as a potential engineered stormwater plan. So this is that slope. They wanted to build in a similar location, if I remember right, of tearing this down and then putting it on the top, but impacting a little bit of the bluff. And you can see how steep it is. And right now they were mowing a lot of that. So this is a mock-up that I had done on that one, kind of showing where the access and the buffer could be and potential of protecting that steeper slope. And this dashed line up here, what I tried to follow is the top of the bluff. So this is another one that I didn't pull up the comments with, but I just wanted to show you, and that a lot of times these are so close to the lake, kind of like the one that you were just dealing with, that there's really not a lot of options for me to recommend. The slope is not a bluff, but it's steep enough that anything in here will help, but it's not going to make a really connected difference as far as what it's treating.
I have a question about, something like that.
Yeah.
What's going to be the benefit of doing it this way than a retaining wall?
Using natural vegetation?
Well, I mean, here it's kind of like tiered with timbers or something.
Correct.
So how is that going to be any different than like putting in a retaining wall?
I'm not understanding your question. What is this going to be different than putting in a retaining wall?
Well, I mean, I've seen some designs where they'll put in a retaining wall and the wall exceeds the height of the ground. So it's not level with the ground.
Okay.
And so that's kind of stopping water, slowing it down, stopping it. And I know with the Planning Commission and with the Board of Adjustments, there's been times we've said, no, you can't. The retaining wall is over so many feet, so you can't do that.
So your question is, what's the negative of having a retaining wall on the slope?
Right.
Well, retaining walls really aren't meant to route water or slow water down. They're mainly just to retain things, like the title says. So retain the soil or something like that. But in situations on lake shores, the slopes are always moving. They're always moving around. So you can build retaining walls, you can engineer retaining walls, and a lot of times they're not really built properly because to tie them into the slope, you need to tie back into the slope quite a ways a lot of times, especially as you lift them up. So any wall that's proposed generally above 4 feet should have tie back into the slope. And it should have quite a bit of it to do that. We call it dead men or, that sort of thing in the business, okay? And then from there, you're losing all of the main root structure that you would have for the most part because you don't have any of the bigger trees. You don't have a lot of the natural shrubs. You don't have any of the natural vegetation like I had showed you earlier that's going to take and stabilize that soil and infiltrate it into the ground. And then at the end of the day, you're still probably going to end up with a failing retaining wall and a slope that's going to have problems somewhere down the road. That could be 5 years, it could be 20, it could be 30, but it's going to have some problems more than likely.
Okay. It's just I have people that come to me and they know I'm on this board, so they come and they ask me questions, and I'd like to be able to explain to them why.
Mm-hmm.
You shouldn't do this or that. Okay.
Yeah, there's some pretty technical reasons, but there's a lot of examples of why. Yep.
Do your rain gutters and rain barrels to collect the water? Is that something that would help this? Slow it down?
It can, yeah. The one thing that's tough with rain barrels is that you have to be sure that the person's going to keep the rain barrel there, empty it out so that the next storm event can take that water, and then it's got enough capacity to handle the amount of gallons that are coming off from the roof or the hard surface.
And tell me nobody recycles their water?
Well, how are we to know that they're doing that consistently?
What I can tell you from a regulatory standpoint is that's a nightmare to try and enforce and keep up with. Because, you know, if there's a condition on a variance that they put in gutters and rain barrels, well, they might put them in, you know, within a first year. And then if you don't go back and visit the site to make sure they're there, poof, they're gone. And
the plug in the bottom is just permanently out.
yeah, or like Greg said, if they're not maintaining the barrels and emptying them and doing that type of thing, there really is no benefit to it. But it can be a useful tool, you know, if it's monitored and maintained.
I didn't come prepared to talk about it either, but you can't imagine how many gallons come off from a roof.
Oh, I know.
And I mean, these barrels are going to take 50 gallons or whatever they're going to take. I mean, that's a drop in the bucket compared to what's coming off that roof. So, and Dave's right. If we had a depression that can handle it, kind of like some of the sizing that I've thrown out in the comments and things like that, or the guidance document that we have, at least you know that depression's there and it's a piece that's in the landscape permanently, and hopefully that water continues to get there and function.
What about like a buffer strip on this property? Is that going to help slow down? If they were to put like a native garden in there somewhere?
Well, that's what I was trying to get you to understand. Like on this one here, I mean, I'm not saying that it won't help, but you can see with the proximity of the building and the hard surface and everything like that, that it will make a minute difference, but it's not going to make a huge difference as far as that. It's going to be better than what's here right now. There's no doubt about that. But I don't think you should be basing that on, hey, we're making a huge impact by allowing a variance to happen with a little bit of vegetation here. Because a lot of times the studies, even though even our policy says that the buffer needs to be 25 feet back from the lake, a lot of the studies say you're not even really making much of an impact on water quality until it's at least 50 feet.
So then why is the standard at 25 then?
Well, because we probably wouldn't get anybody to do them. I mean, I'm just being frank and honest.
I'm
Yep.
asking questions.
Yep.
So.
And there's so many structures that are so close already, we're already impacting a lot of their area, you know, and a lot of people don't qualify just because structures are too close or things like that, so that we just have a compromise, so to speak. We'll take more than 25, we'll do more than 25, but a lot of people just can't live with that. So we do end up doing restorations with our work that a lot of times we'll do 25 and then people like it enough that they expand it. We see that. So here's another one on Big Birch, and this one was another one that was really close. So there's technical concerns with trying to treat the water due to the proximity to the lake, and another one where other technical options need to be pursued, probably with an engineered stormwater plan if they're actually going to do this. So you can see right here, this is where it sits, and they wanted to add on to this one if I remember right. And there's just not much green space between what we call hard anyway with the rock riprap all the way up the bank, and then this little area between the deck and the top of that. And then even in between, you've got hard surface even coming off these steps in between there and the steps going down to the dock. So this is one, Schaefer's out on Rice Lake, and a lot of the water goes towards Rice Lake right now, or did. And one of the things that they had on this that I remember was they had a no-mow buffer, at least on the slope of the lake, which was good. That provides some restoration benefits and some stormwater treatment. And the one thing that I recommended on this one, and then another one that I have pictures of here, is that if they're going to remove that structure and rebuild, why not use the depressional area from where the structure is removed and route the water into that? It seems like it's not a lot of work. Rather than filling that to existing grade all the way around, leave it depressed maybe a foot or something like that. You still need to consider what the size of that should be, so maybe it could even be shrunk from the foundation size, but that's something that should be considered. So that's the structure. I had kind of a longer photo away from it, but right here, that was going to be removed, and it was something that could have been routed, water could have been routed to that. Here's the survey of it, and so this was the cabin that was there, and it was going to be demoed, and then this was the proposed structure. So at least part of this roof water, if not all of it, and driveway could have been routed to that area.
I want to just hop in on this one real quick because this one was kind of recent on Rice Lake. And again, not criticizing your decisions, but this would be one where I question if they met the criteria for obtaining a variance because they had 10 acres and they could have met the setback 10 times over. So I get it, you know, how they convinced it. The burden of proof is on the applicant and you voted for it and then life goes on, right? But per the DNR's presentation last week, we have to make sure you're first meeting the criteria, and then if so, then move on to a mitigation. So.
If I remember right, that was the one where 96% of their lot was beyond the setback, and we let them build in the 4%.
This is another one where they were proposing to remove the structure, I remember, and then they still needed a variance, I think because of the distance between the lake and the road. And so it was another opportunity that could have presented itself to route the water into this building that was this area where this building sits right now. That's the shoreline. And this is what we see a lot, is a lot of these walls like this just tearing things, and you can see it's not really, a lot of times Dave dealt with this for years. I mean, it's not really retaining soil, it's more aesthetics than it is anything for people. They think that cleans things up, looks good, you know, identifies their property, whatever you want to call it. And then I think this might be the last one. So an Olson on Two Rivers Lake. This one's not all that complicated, but they could expand the gutter system on the roof lines to direct the water away from the lake. So as simple as not having it go towards the lake, have it go in the opposite direction. And a little bit of grading or tile might be needed to do that. And then this one also had lawn right to the lake, so they could do a buffer as well. And it would provide some benefits for shoreline restoration as well as stormwater treatment either way. So this is, you know, how they have it set up right now. Gutters come off from the edge, and you can see they even took the liberty to grade, a swale in here. So this takes the water and conveys it right down to the lake through that beautiful lawn. And this is the yard in front of the place all the way down to the lake. So obviously mowed from lot line to lot line, and a lot of opportunity there for restoration. And this one's flat enough that the buffer would do a lot more good for water quality because it just isn't going to just run through it so fast. The other thing to consider is on lawn is if it gets mowed heavily, you can't call it impervious surface, but it's the next closest thing because it gets pounded so hard all the time, watered and then ran over with a garden tractor or foot traffic even enough that it's pretty hard. It's not infiltrating like it normally would.
And residents, I would think, would be more likely to fertilize the mowed lawn than they would the wild grasses and plants, so that adds even a greater problem.
Yeah, there's no need to fertilize native vegetation, and there's also no need to water it once it's established. When when we see drought periods like we've had the last couple of years, the native vegetation takes off and the weeds suffer. And so it's got such deep root systems, like I showed before, it finds water, especially close to the lake like this. So this is the survey of that one. So this one really shows a lot. You can see like they still have a big front yard here between the structure and the lake where they could do this buffer and still have a nice access in my viewpoint. The other thing is that this lot lent itself that they could take this water and run it back across the driveway, and there was a natural depressional wetland area back here, and that stormwater could have went that direction rather than towards the lake.
Can you clarify tile? Are we talking like a tile line kind of thing, or?
So yeah, so like you know what gutters and downspouts are.
Yes.
They come off from the corners a lot of times in some of these areas of the building, and then you can route those into a tile if you want to, like a maybe 4 or 6 inch tile that would be under the ground and then outlet it this direction. Or you can just do some simple grading, kind of like that swale that I showed you was right on this lot line. That swale could be directed this direction rather than towards the lake.
So, this might sound stupid. That tile line that potentially can go in there, can you drain that into the wetland?
Sure. There's no law against that. Mm-hmm. Now, ideally, we wouldn't put any stormwater in the wetland, but we all know that's not the case, and it's probably, in my viewpoint, a better place to put it than it is to put it in the lake.
Then that water will be filtered before it ends up back in the lake.
Right, either groundwater interaction, or if there's a way that it kind of routes through that wetland and then overtops into the lake or something like that, but at least it's filtered. And it also, you know, helps even with storm events as far as flooding, because you're taking that bounce away from it all just flushing into the lake when it rains. I think that's all I had for examples. The one thing I wanted to mention, so I made the comment last week, and I might have been just a little fired up, but, you know, I think I made the comment that probably 75% of these, there's not a lot that can be done. Now, there's some things here that can be done that can make a difference, and that, you know, even those slopes with those retaining walls that you were asking about, it's better to have native vegetation there than it is to have the retaining walls and grass. But what I meant was, there's a lot of those in that case where if you're looking at just the water quality, there's not much happening by doing many of these mitigation options, unless you're taking it into a depression, or like this last one, the yard's flat enough that it can go through and soak in, or you have a long enough buffer like what I was talking about width-wise that it can do something or make a difference. So I just want you to understand that when I make these comments, I'm giving you options, but they're not the silver bullet. You know, I mean, they're options. They're things to consider, but try to read into them. Like when I say minimal, or I say things like that, you know, that they're not going to make a huge difference. More questions? Anything I can clarify?
At the beginning, you talked about the DNR website, the new one that just went online.
Mm-hmm.
Where do I find that?
So if you
Is that
type
the DNR watershed health?
Yeah, so if you go to Minnesota DNR, and even if you Google Minnesota DNR watershed health assessment framework, it's called WHAF, W-H-A-F.
Angie, is that something you can send out in an email?
Yeah. I mean, if you're doing any research like prior to the meeting or something like that, it'd be a great tool to have in your toolbox to just kind of get some background information on what's going on with that lake.
So some of these lakes that are classified, you know, whatever, do they get better over time with some of this stuff? I mean, when we're testing them every year, do you see a difference in the testing?
Yeah, there's some of them that have an improving water quality standard, or even some of these we feel like we're gaining even by keeping them where they're at, with the amount of development that's going on and different things like that. So we're doing some things that are good, and there's some things that are bad. Hopefully we'll level that out and it kind of stays the same, so to speak. And there are some that are actually getting removed from what's called the impaired waters list. So there's enough work that's being done, not only maybe right on the shore, but in the watersheds of these lakes, that they're getting removed. Now, I mean, that's not happening one after another, but there's some things that do happen that can make a difference that way.
Why do we let them use fertilizer?
Well, technically, they're not supposed to.
Well, and you know what's funny is like on Two Rivers Lake,
Yeah.
you don't need fertilizer.
No.
Most of these people water
They're
out of the
underwater
lake.
half the time.
There's so many nutrients in that lake. There's no need for fertilizer whatsoever.
Are people aware of that? I mean, isn't there a Two Rivers watershed? I mean, isn't that?
There used to be.
That's right, that one's gone.
If they did a soil test, they'd find out that our soils are so rich in phosphorus, and then like Dave's saying, 99% of them pump water out of the lake, which has nutrients in it anyway, that we don't need to put any phosphorus on.
Why isn't a soil test recommended in this then?
Well, there's no regulation against what they're putting on their lawn. The biggest thing is people, we do try to promote with them that the middle number is 0.
Right.
And that's your phosphorus on your fertilizer. So if you can at least do that, that helps.
You know, we could actually throw in, we'd have to look for a little handout or something, but like I stated last week at the shoreline training with DNR, we send out information to new property owners in shoreline, maybe a separate little thing on fertilizer, right?
Fertilizer or get your ground test. I mean, we tested before we put our fertilizer in that done before we're putting crops in the ground. I mean, everyone does soil sampling. I mean, I don't see why we couldn't implement that a little bit more too.
It's just not something residential landowners think about.
Right.
Maybe it's something we can make it aware to them. You know, maybe they would be more for it. Oh, hey, you know, I didn't know. I mean, it's like testing your water for fluoride. You know, it can be a natural substance. It can be high. It can be low. You can get too much. You can get too little.
Yeah, that's a big deal. Salt or chloride's a big deal. I mean, as far as from even applying it to your driveway or your sidewalk or the road or, you know, out of your softener if too much is being used. So.
It just sounds like it's an awareness issue.
But as you've stated before, trying to make people aware of stuff. I think a couple years ago they sent out all those postcards to all of the land or lake homeowners. Yep. And we on numerous occasions when we've been talking to people, we said, well, do you ever remember getting a postcard? None of them remember that. It came in the mail and went in the garbage.
But social media is a beautiful tool, too. I mean, it could be something that could be added to a website. Most people are apt to look, I mean, maybe me more so. I'm apt to look at a website than looking at paper.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But that's just my generation.
Yeah.
Everything is, you know, it's like, I don't need mail. Just give me an email, you know?
So I have a question. I've been doing this for a few years now. From my standpoint to you, is there anything I could do different or be clearer about, or maybe, you know, I'm open to feedback too. This is kind of both ways.
Just my experience over the years, it's excellent to have that information, and it's even better now to know, you know, how much of a difference it really does make. The struggle that I have is the money, where I see these folks, they already have to pay a couple $100 just to even have the variance application. And then if we have to give them an additional burden where I don't know how much money it costs to make a swale. I don't know how much money it costs to plant native plants versus just letting the grass grow taller. I don't feel comfortable, and maybe I should, but I don't right now, of giving them that extra financial burden when I don't know how much that burden is. I don't know if that's my place.
And you wouldn't need to give us that information on each and every one, but if you could just say to install, I know every property is different, but just say on average to install so many square feet of natural vegetation would cost so much on an average of what it would cost to.
We actually have that on it's part of our variance application now.
Okay.
We have a number in there.
Variance application, never mind.
Well,
I can email one.
Can you pull that up, or?
Angie.
And I apologize, I'm very new to this, so.
Oh, you're good.
Yeah, but we oftentimes don't see what they have to fill out and do ahead of time before it gets to
So
us.
we could look at that, and I could see, because if there's any other information that we could provide you as far as averages, that would be the best way to do it, rather than me trying to do a cost estimate for each additional one.
That wouldn't.
Because you might change, you know, what dimensions or whatever it might be anyway, you know.
But if we looking at these on the merits of them, not on the cost of these things that you're suggesting. Let's look at the merits of the case, and if we approve it, then we need to look at what you recommend. And to me, like I mentioned at the meeting before, to me, we're gonna bake the cake, and if we can put really nice icing on it, we could recommend that.
Mhm.
And so, to me, cost is not a factor because we're trying to maintain standards here. We're trying to make our lakes. You want that on? Yeah. Oh, sorry. We're trying to make our lakes better, cleaner, etc. So, for me, cost is not a factor to me. If the people that are asking for it want it bad enough, and it's a restriction we put on it, they'll spend the money. And a lot of these come in on the lake shore. I'll be honest with you, they have the money to do this because it's a second place for them, or So I'm not dissuaded by doing these kind of things based on how much it costs.
On the mitigation document.
I like facts, so I like when you give
Right there in red.
this would make a difference, this would make a difference, this overall would make the best difference. I'm more of a fact typer.
Okay, I could try to blend that in there a little bit without telling you should do this, you know what I mean? Or just saying the value of this is high or low or medium or, something like that. Yep.
Like, that was great, like, it gives me a better perspective on, okay, well, this could work, but this could be better.
Mm-hmm. I wanted Rob to hear this, and then you can go ahead, Bonnie, but as far as what George just said, and Jill, along with what you're talking about with cost, many times when I go and visit these sites, I end up meeting with the landowner. I don't schedule it, but they happen to be there and we walk the property and we talk about things. And I would say majority of the time, they're like, I don't have a problem with what you're recommending, or at least that's what they're telling me, if I can do what I want to do. I mean, that's the feedback I'm getting.
And I'll hop in on that too, though, because, and I've sat at this very chair many nights and looked at applicants and said, do you understand what that means? And I did that for that Sebin one a few months back, and they didn't understand what it meant. She thought she had to put rain gutters on, and that would have been maybe a $15,000 solution to mitigation. So, I mean, kind of, it's good discussion, right? Because, like, to your point, Jill, like the application tonight, they got a lot that was worth $125,000. If you want a lot on Lake Coronis that you don't need a variance for, you're spending probably $300,000. So I get what you're saying. They have the right to apply, and they have to prove why they should or shouldn't have to do mitigation, or why they should or shouldn't get the variance. But a lot of times it's you get what you pay for. And these are tough decisions that you guys and every Board of Adjustment across the state has. Cabins are becoming year-round homes every single day. And we barely permit seasonal cabins anymore. So everybody's going to want to get bigger. And so that's tough.
But we've had applications that are in the Shoreland Overlay District that are lots away from the lake. And I've been to site visits where it's obvious those folks do not have $500,000. If you rubbed all their pennies together, they would be nowhere near it. So I get what you're saying, especially for lake lots, but we do run into applicants where that's not the case.
And like you said, on yours, you kind of try to key us in. If you say something is, it's going to make a minimal difference, and if it's going to make just a minimal difference, but it's going to cost way up here to do it, that's going to make me, whether after we've made the decision to either grant or not grant it, if we're looking at mitigation, that's going to make a difference to me what I recommend for mitigation, because if it's going to make minimal difference, but it's going to cost $30,000 to do it. Versus five or something, $5,000.
If he's going to give us minimal recommendation, that's going to be his only option. You're going to give us the best that they can do.
I'm
right?
trying to find the best options,
right.
Yeah.
And if you say it's going to, if they do A, B, and C, and it's going to have minimal impact, that's still better than nothing.
Still an
Mr. Chair, my suggestion would be if you feel like you're imposing a financial burden and you want to go in the direction of mitigation, then your no-mow buffer is probably your best bang for your, I mean, you know, you're going to get something out of that. And that's not going to be as costly an option for a landowner, you know, versus having to implement a native plant buffer at $370 per square foot on average.
Okay.
You know,
that slide that you showed with that very short shoreline? Like in that instance, like what can you do to make that better?
The one with the retaining walls in it?
No, the one where the wood was engraved in.
Yeah.
And the slope.
Okay. So they'd have to pull out those timbers or the wood that you're talking about, add a little bit of fill, and then they would have to either quit mowing it, so to speak, like what Dave's saying, or plant some vegetation in there, which would probably be the best option at that point, even if it was just seeded.
Okay, so when you did the letter on what your recommendation was, why wasn't that in there? Why didn't you recommend pulling, or did I miss that?
Well, it was to establish a no-mow buffer. It wasn't, I guess I didn't go into the detail of what the construction plans would have to be to accomplish that. You know, I don't know how detailed you want me to get as far as every.
To me, that would have been a nice fact to know that that's something that they could have done. You know, maybe they would have, you know.
Well, that's a good point, Amy, too, because I wouldn't have, it's probably inherent to Greg and probably Dave that that's what they'd have to do, but to me, I was like, well, can they just kill what's there and plant something new over the top?
Right, or.
So I do see what you're saying. If that would end up having to be a shoreline alteration, too.
And then I'm thinking of Bonnie's idea with the retaining wall, you know, trying to, done right correctly, it would hold that, you know, sediment back. You know, is that?
But yet, the problem with retaining walls is the water comes over the top and into the lake. You know.
But if they're done correctly, they could be effective, correct?
Not for water quality.
Okay.
The
I mean,
good news is the Board of Adjustment doesn't have to deal with retaining wall permits. That's the Planning Commission.
But I'm just saying for me to, you know, to know that that would have been beneficial to me to know that, hey, you know what, we can rip this out. It might be more cost effective to do that than to do something else.
Are you guys going to make somebody go through that much work?
another problem with retaining walls is they're going to collect water behind them. And then eventually, as Greg pointed out, that system's going to fail.
Oh, yeah.
It's just how long is it going to take? Yeah.
It's a problematic situation by doing that, trying to route water with retaining walls.
Yeah.
It still doesn't work. A lot of times they put impermeable fabric behind them, which is basically like putting plastic behind them because they don't know any better. And then basically it acts like a balloon behind it with the water.
And your landscapers want to sell retaining walls.
That's where the money is.
Right.
Yep.
Correct.
All the money.
That's right.
And I do apologize. Again, I'm very new to this, so I do have lots of questions.
That's good.
Okay.
That's why I'm here. Questions are good.
Bonnie, the one thing I wanted to suggest, and I think you mentioned it, Shelley, after that shoreline meeting last week, and you kind of touched on it again tonight. I wonder if it would be beneficial for you as a board to change up how you're voting on some of these. So do you go through the vote first on the item? And as George said, so you bake the cake. It's either you bake it or not. And if you bake it and it's approved, then you decide as a group, again, you have to have a second vote on whether or not you want to impose findings. Just a thought.
But I'm wondering about the legality of it. Once we vote and approve it,
then it's done.
Then it's done.
Yep.
So how can we add conditions after it's done? Unless during that vote we'll say we'll vote for this with, and we'd have to verbally say that with discussion of conditions following the vote.
Right.
So maybe instead of when we vote, it's when we are finished with the different conditions, but before we make the movement to approve or deny. So in that gap, I could see that would be within the legal bounds.
Yeah, that's definitely, it could work that way. It could work where you know that you would as an individual vote to approve it, no matter if there was going to be mitigation or not, because remember, that's what you're supposed to do anyway. So then then let's say you all approve, you vote to approve a variance, and then the majority of you in the subsequent motion decide that mitigation isn't worth it, the variance still stands.
But I'm just wondering, is it legal then, but I'm just concerned that somebody will say, well, before they added these conditions, they had already voted yes, so now they can't add conditions after the vote.
I see. We could figure that part out. We would
I'm just saying
figure out
we
how
have
to word
do it
that.
carefully to word it correctly.
Yep.
But
So when you make these recommendations, do those recommendations go, do the applicants see that right away? What you're,
Yes, when I receive them for Greg or Jamie or Brian, we forward those to the applicant.
okay,
And
and
we
you
just-
have that discussion with the applicant? And when you have that discussion with the applicant, I mean, how is their thought process when you're saying that we should implement this?
Well, most applicants are willing to go along with whatever's going to get them approval.
Okay.
You know, and I'm just going to give you a heads up. You're going to see an application in a couple months here where they're going to want to remove the planted buffer condition. So they're all yes, yes, yes. You know, oh yeah, we'll do whatever it takes. But then when the hearing's over, now you're chasing them to put a buffer in. And you know, you can have that discussion up front, and we like to do that. But you're not always getting in the end what the applicant, I mean, they go back on their word and don't want to put it in.
So the one you're talking about is one that should have been put in that wasn't put in?
Correct.
Okay.
And now they're wanting to go back to the board to have that removed.
Okay.
They're gonna come with, well, we'll do a normal buffer. We don't want to have to do the planted buffer because it's too costly.
That shoreline thing that we were at, I did learn something, and maybe this is something the public could be aware of. I didn't realize that you could go on the Minnesota DOT site, and they would give you ideas on what you should be planting in your area. I don't know if that's something the public should be made aware of. I didn't know that existed. I mean, I'm not going to plant Kentucky bluegrass when it's not going to work in my soil.
We have a whole guidance document, though, that we developed to hand to these people on even how they put together even a full-blown native buffer. It goes into if you're in the transition zone and it's shady, this is what the plants that you'd use, and here's how many that you should use, and here's how you calculate your seed, and here's how you calculate your plants. So that's not an excuse.
Okay.
Yeah.
Again, I didn't know that existed.
Yeah. I emailed those lists out just last week to a variance we had a couple years ago. Now we're chasing them to put the buffer in.
Okay.
And the property switched hands. You still got to put the buffer in. What? Sorry, that's condition.
Wasn't that disclosed when they sell it?
Yeah, I don't think there was a deed restriction per se on that. But I think they're willing to do it. I don't know if they're going to, DIY it or hire someone. But I sent those very lists that Greg's speaking about to them.
Do you mind if I see a copy of what those lists look like?
No,
Yep, I just wrote it down.
Yeah.
Yeah, Nick Newman from the department and I spent a lot of time putting that together so that it was kind of like step by step, the whole thing on how they could do it.
And I think a couple years ago or something, I don't know if
You had asked for that.
Yeah,
Yep.
I think the board asked for that. We got
Mm-hmm.
that given to us.
Do you have recommendations like for trees and
Yep,
all that?
that's all in there.
It's all
Yep.
there, yeah.
Yep. I mean, it's kind of like shoreline restoration for the layman or basic people to be able to take it and run with it. I mean, you could pull it off doing it yourself.
Like Shoreline 101 dummy?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Oops.
Well, and it's not like the staff at the office or myself wouldn't answer some questions either if somebody was like really trying hard to implement one of these conditions. I'm not going to come out there and dig it for them or, plant everything for them, but I mean, we can guide them on the best way to accomplish it too.
So there's really no particular outcome of tonight, just kind of general discussion. Wanted to keep it going from last week, and we appreciate you guys took a whole hour probably to talk about this extra. So
Yeah, you tricked us.
we did. Thank you. And real quick, Mr. Chair, unless there's any other discussion on the shoreline mitigation, I just wanted to correct, Amy, you are 100% correct. The map, it does indicate for that property that you had tonight, it's split.
And if I could just jump in here, I apologize, Amy. I didn't want to be dismissive of your question because it's a valid question. There's R5 on the north or the road side does cut through there. However,
Yeah.
the building site is residential 1.
I
Yeah.
get that.
Yeah, and it shouldn't really say on the Beacon website that it's R5.
Whole section does until
Well,
you
behind the
get
blue
here.
line there, yeah, is R5.
Yeah.
But the overriding zoning there set for setbacks and uses is R1. And this is what drives me nuts about our zoning in this county is we have split zoning on parcels. And it's either R5 or it's R1, but yeah, that's how it maps out that way.
My question to that was if you have R1 obviously towards the shoreline and you're R5 and they're moving this house back, they'd be moving it back into R5 zone, correct?
May not move that far back.
Probably not. Their septic location was really right around where that boundary is, where the blue line is, adjacent to the neighbor's shed that was here. I don't think they would, in any scenario, would build that far back.
Okay. Could have.
But
Could
is
have.
it possible?
But then,
Yeah.
Then does that change the whole concept of the application? So we don't want to build an R1, we want to build in the R5. Do they even need to be here?
Well, their proposal, their specific proposal
Was for
to build in that location and that's R1 in that specific location. But it's a valid question, Amy, and I was kind of short and
Probably weren't expecting that.
well,
Good, and you're right. I mean, you saw it correctly. It's a goofy situation.
Well, I just thought it was really weird that the other lots to the whole other left side are all R1. And here we are with double zone.
yeah, and these lots are obviously way deeper. They're much, much deeper. And that's why that R5 cuts through there. It shouldn't be there, but it is.
That GSI map is up to date as of 2021.
It's up to date as of what happened at the board meeting Tuesday for rezonings. Yeah, it's just the maps don't match the parcels.
Yeah,
It's kind of a long story, but basically when we first did zoning, we didn't have a parcel-based map. So we were drawing colors with markers on section maps, not per parcel boundaries. So had we done it today, what we did 25 years ago, that blue line, right, would have been moved up to the road. So it's just we've had some townships go back and correct all of theirs so they match because it bugs certain townships. Paynesville isn't one that's approached us to do that, so. Mr. Chair, we still have minutes too, so thank you for that.
Yeah, next item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes from January 12th, 2023.
I will move to approve the December 2022 meeting minutes.
Or January 12th, 2023. Do we have?
Well,
Oh.
it says
How was-
December 22 on the agenda.
Because we moved December into January.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, we can put it as that too, right?
Well, I think what we'll do is indicate the actual day of the meeting, which was January.
Okay.
That isn't anything I can make a motion on, correct? Since I technically.
You
wasn't
can.
at the meeting. I mean, I was there. I was.
Oh, you were. Oh,
Yeah.
so you were.
Go for it.
There, but I wasn't physically a member.
Yeah. You can still vote.
I'll second.
Bill, all those in favor of approving the minutes as presented, say aye.
Aye.
Same sign, motion carries. Our next meeting is March 9th. Do you have any idea how many applicants we have for that at this point, or? One.
And no secret thing on the agenda.
I
I'm going to be in a different
pinky
country
swear?
that week, so I won't
Fair.
even be here. And Dave won't, no secret things. One on the agenda.
I have a bad feeling Shelley's like, nobody told me about this. Nobody told me about this one.
It's a dual request.
Okay. Oh.
Is it water related?
Well, it is, but it's a farm on a natural environment lake. It's not this kind of thing.
Okay.
It's different. I mean, it's a farm is the main difference, I would say.
My language.
And I just have one question. I think this happened because we went from the December, got moved to January, and usually when we get the first in a quarter, the first meeting, we get the mileage sheets and things. And so I don't think we got them with the January because it really was the December. So if when we get the stuff for the March, if we can get the pay sheets for January, February, March, because usually I fill those out as we go along.
I don't have any right now.
No, so I'm just doing a scrap of paper at home.
Okay. We can email them.
Oh yeah, that's
Okay,
fine. Yeah, and if I just get emailed and then I'll have a generic, and don't fill in the January, February, March on the little line up in the top, then I can fill that in and always have one on hand in case. Oh, thank you.
And I
Got
need a
one.
badge.
You need a
That one.
badge. And if you guys want, I can quick run upstairs and make some copies of that too.
You can just send it in PDF.
Oh, Jill is our new secretary. Rob, you're kicked out.
He's Rob. Usurping you.
Thank you,
Wow.
Jill.
That's a bloodless
for
coup.
Amy.
Oh, but and do we need to change it because this one says 22?
Just change it with your. Yep. The mileage
But that's not a problem.
change.
Yeah, the mileage will change. It did or didn't?
Did not.
It did not. Oh, okay.
It goes with federal, whatever the federal
Right.
is.
They just did it last year.
Yeah.
Well, usually that might sometimes changes during the middle of the year, depending on gas prices.
All right. With one item
Yeah,
with the promise
but-
of no secret agenda after that, I'm going to, hold you to that. Can I get a motion to adjourn?
I move to adjourn.
I'll second.
Second from Jill. All those in favor? Aye. Stand adjourned. I do.
No, I was expecting it actually to go down because last year it went way up.
Yeah.
It went up to